Today's daf we're going to be learning today is Sanhedrin Daf Samach Daled. Today's daf is sponsored by David and Ruth Leah Cahan in honor of Dr. Jody Duche and Professor Paul Gompers in celebration of the birth of their first grandchild, Aiden Oz Shulman. We're going to get started. We have a very interesting daf, particularly the first part. We're actually going to repeat a sugya that we saw in Yoma. I'm not sure if yesterday when you were learning you were thinking about it. If not, well, maybe probably is likely. I know in Daf Yomi you don't really remember everything, but maybe once you see the story, you'll remember it again. Really talking about the evil inclination for avodah zarah. There was a famous story in Yoma that we're going to repeat here, and what the Gemara is really struggling with, and we started with Rav, who basically said that the Jews really weren't into avodah zarah. They knew that it was nothing. Why would people bow down to idols? And really, what pushed them to worship avodah zarah was that they wanted to really their desires were for gilui arayot, for inappropriate sexual relations. That really was what motivated them to worship idols. If they worshiped idols, then they could sort of leave the realm of God, which forbade that, and the idol worshippers were engaged in all that, and that was like their ticket into that. But there isn't really this big desire to worship idols, and what he's really getting at is what he sees around him, which is, yeah, and there was a bit of an issue because in the prophets they talk all the time about avodah zarah and how many psukim, right? We've already seen they quoted so many different psukim about not worshiping idols, and this is what the nations were doing. But like when you're in the Gemara and the time of the Gemara, you're living now, it's not the biggest desire that people have to worship idols, and that's really what the Gemara is trying to get at. So Rabbi Yehuda basically quotes Rav as saying, yeah, there really is no big desire. It's all just for some other motive. And that's why people ended up worshiping idols. To which the Gemara is going to bring a slew of questions. We started with the first one, how they remember the Mizbechotam. Okay, now they're assuming, what's also interesting is right now it sounds like, well, there was no desire then and there's no desire now. And therefore the quoting psukim that obviously relate to before their time, where, it sounds like they remembered like their sons, the way they missed their sons. And, that's how they remember their Mizbechot, their altars to the idols. And then they said, no, that was after they, and again, the initial in, and this is the way we're going to answer all our difficulties today. The initial in was motivated by wanting to really do Gilui Arayot, but once they were in, well, then they were connected with it, and then they really desired it. And that's what we're going to do with the next source as well. So the next source says, okay, it starts with, and I'll just review the beginning of what we read. Naftati pigrechem al pigrei gilulechem, which literally means I will put your dead bodies on top of the dead bodies of the idols. So what does this mean? Well, they tell a story of Eliyahu who meets this child who's a malnourished child from the destruction of Jerusalem, and he starts up a conversation. He realizes this child not just is malnourished, has no family left, and is all alone. He says to the child, I'll tell you, you want to know how to survive? The child says, absolutely. He says, say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. So interestingly, right, we ended the story there because the daf ended there, but it's an interesting place to end because kind of ask you, well, what's the next reaction? Okay, the kid says, fine, I'll say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. But Amarlo, the child says, Has, quiet, don't say that to me. Shalola has killed the Shem Hashem. I won't call out in the name of God. I won't say Shema Yisrael, Shalolim Do Avi V'imo, because my parents didn't teach me to believe in God. My parents didn't bring me up that way. How did they bring him up? Well, you'll see in a minute. Miyad Hotzi Hirato Micheko, he immediately takes out this little idol he has in his pocket, and Mechabka Umenashkan, he hugs it and kisses it. Ad Shedivka Akre, so until his stomach explodes from the malnourishment. V'nafla yirato la'aretz, and his idol falls on the ground. V'nafalhu aleha, and he falls on top of the idol. And that's the kiyum of the pasuk l'kayem she'ne'amal. That's the fulfillment of this verse. V'natati pigrechem al pigrei gilulechem. So it's a story that shows, first of all, how much desire there was to do avodah zarah, and it clearly is connected with Gilui Arayah because this is a child, and the parents brought up the child believing in this. Now, you wouldn't say, well, the parents wanted the child to be involved in inappropriate sexual relations, and that's why, right? It's just irrelevant there, what we explained before. So again, the answer is Batar da Avikube. Again, the parents maybe, or their parents, or somewhere before, what initial motivation was for the arayot, the desire, other desires, but eventually, once they were in it, well, then they desired it also. Next source, okay, third difficulty, Tashma. Vayizaku b'kol gadol Hashem Elohehem. This is in Nehemiah. And in Sefer Nehemiah, right, we're talking about the return to Zion, and it's the Anshe Knesset Agdola, and they basically call out to God, or okay, it's Nehemiah and his people, which are considered the Anshe Knesset Agdola, and they call out to God. Okay, this is when people were, if you remember, there was intermarriage. They were trying to separate the intermarried people, and they cry out to God. So Mayamor, what did they say to God in this big cry? Amar Rab Yehuda v'item Rabbi Yonatan. What they said, so either Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Yonatan says, what they said was baya baya, okay, which is like some sort of cry, like oy vavoy kind of thing. Hainu da'achreve lebeta v'kalya lehechla. This is, now what is this? This is the Avodah Zarah. The Avodah Zarah is what destroyed the house, meaning the Beit HaMikdash. Kalya lehechle, it burned, it caused the Hechal to burn, the sanctuary. Katlinu litzadike, it caused tzadikim, righteous people, to be killed. Vaglinu l'Yisrael me'arayu, and it caused the Jewish people to leave their land. What they're basically saying is, Bayit Rishon, the first, right, the first temple was destroyed because of Avodah Zarah. Va'adayin hu mirakeh beinan, and not only that, it's still here. There's still this desire to worship Avodah Zarah. Again, what do you see? The desire is there, okay, as opposed to what Rav said, which is it's not. Klum. Now, what do they continue to cry out to God? They say to God, listen, we understand how you work, okay? They're trying to assess. Why'd you give this to us, this desire to worship idols? Klum yavtelan ele kibule be'agra, right? Didn't you give it to us just to get reward? In other words, if you don't have any desire to do anything, then you're not going to get rewarded for not doing it, right? But if you have a desire to do something and you don't give into that desire, God will reward you. So they're basically saying, we assume that's why you gave it to us. Well, you know what? Lo ihu b'ina v'lo agra b'ina. We don't want the desire, because look at what destruction it costs, and we'll live without the reward. Okay, better we don't have it at all. So that's the source, although the story is going to continue. Batar de avikube. So again, they say this doesn't contradict what we said before, because again, this is after they cling to it, then it becomes a strong desire. Okay, and we're done with our questions against Rav. But they want to tell us the continuation of the story of the Anshe Knesset Agdola. Yatvu tlata yome betanita. So they sit and fast for 3 days, hoping that God will give in to their request. Ba'u rachame, they ask for rachamim, they pray for mercy. Nafaluhu pitkami rakia davaktiv ba'emet. And a petek, a note, falls from the heavens, and it says on there emet. Meaning, yes, I will give you what you ask for. Amar Rabbi Chanina Shmamina, a side point. Rabbi Chanina says you can learn from here. Chotamosh l'kadosh baruch hu emet. The signature of God is truth, right? That's really saying that, not if you see truth, you know that's God, but you know the signature truth. But what it means is that is a word that represents God, truth. God is truth, and that's why he signed his name Truth. Nafik kiguria denura mi beit kodshei kodeshim. So now this amazing, and this is the story we saw in Yoma, this fiery cub, lion cub, comes out of the Holy of Holies, okay? This fiery lion cub is the Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah, okay, for idol worship. Comes out of the Holy of Holies, okay, if you remember, we talked about in Yom, because it was all about the Holy of Holies. This is the most sacred place of the world, and that's where it's coming out of. Very strange. Amr Lahu Navi Israel, the Navi said to the Jewish people at the time, Hainu Yitzra Avodah Zarah. This is, look, you see that thing coming? That is the Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah. Bahadi de Katav Sele. Now they went to catch it. In other words, the point is it's out now and you can catch it. So they go to catch it. Ishtimit binita mine. One hair falls off of this cub. Va'azal kale ba'arba mea parse. And the lion screamed from the one little hair falling, screamed so loud you could hear 400 parasangs away. That's always an amount of, space that's, really far. Amru hechinavi. They said, okay, now what do we do? Because if the lion screams so loud when this one hair fell off, Dilma mishmaya meracham alei. Maybe God will have mercy on this lion, and maybe God won't let us capture it. Amar, and they don't want the lion to be screaming because God will hear the lion's cries. Okay, of course, God will hear the lion's cries anyway, but right now, say God will hear the lion's cries. We don't want God to hear it, so what are we going to do? Amar lehu navi. Now the navi said the reason why they're saying a navi is because we're going to get to a pasuk in Zecharia, which is going to reference this again, not reference this, but the pasuk in Zecharia was talking about something, and they're going to connect it and darshan it for the story. And they say, what did he say? Shadyu bedu de avra, put it in a cauldron of lead, v'kasyu ba'avra, and fill it with lead, deshayiv kale, because that, like an acoustic room, right? That will keep the sound in and God won't hear the sounds. Again, it's strange. God won't hear the sounds, but the idea is let's muffle the sound, and that's the way to deal with it. Dichtiv. Now, where does this come from? It's a drasha in this pasuk by Yomer Zotarisha. Zecharia, the prophet, says this is evil. As if he had something that represented evil. That's why we're darshaning it for here. He puts it in this ephah. And he puts this stone of lead on top of it. Okay, so there they darshan it for this story. Amre, now they said, okay, so now they've captured the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination for Avodah Zarah. It's no longer in existence. It's not out there in the world doing damage. So now they said, well, we're on a roll. Okay, well, what other big desire do we have in the world? This Gilor Arayot, okay, this inappropriate sexual behavior that's going on. Let's try to get rid of that as well. So they prayed to God, and in fact, they were given that too. So whatever, here we don't get a whole description of what its form was, but they put it like in jail. They kind of cage it up for 3 days. And they needed a fresh egg for a sick person. And they couldn't find a fresh egg. In other words, what's the problem? Without the desire for Giloy Arayot, nobody's having not children and none of the animals are reproducing. Right? Obviously, you needed to see it quickly because you wouldn't see that in a human yet. It wouldn't be noticeable 3 days later. So, they said, what are we going to do? Nibai palde. So they said, let's ask for half. Let's ask God to basically say, we don't want the desire for forbidden sexual relations. We do want the desire for sexual relations with spouses, with, mates when it's animals and all that. But what's the response? Palga mirakia lo yave. You can't get half requests from God. It doesn't work that way. It's either all or nothing. So now they don't know what to do. So they can't ask God. So the only thing they have is what they can do themselves. So what they do, kachlinu la'ein. Now we don't know what this was exactly, but it was something that had eyes to it, this evil inclination, and they poked its eyes out. And what did this do? This at least somewhat minimized the desire for forbidden sexual relations in the sense that people no longer desire to sleep with their relatives, right? And that was part of it got resolved. And this, as you can see, reflects the reality of today, right? We have very few people have this strong desire. People do worship idols, but there's not like there's this strong desire to worship idols. And there's not this strong desire to have relations with your mother, your sister, your brother, right? All those people that are forbidden. But there is still a desire for sexual relations in general. And this story is trying to explain to you why that is. Okay, fascinating story. What can we do with this? So one of my books that I've mentioned a bunch of times is Fresh Fruit and Vintage Wine. It's by Rabbi Yitzchak Blau, and he talks about this story. It was obvious he was going to talk about the story. It's the kind of thing he likes to talk about he takes a Agadatod and whether it's a story or whether it's a, some sort of lesson the rabbis are trying to teach and brings, firstly, a bunch of different opinions about it. And he quotes and he says, the story raised a lot of questions. A lot of the commentaries don't really relate to them the way we were looking for, but he does quote something that the Gra says in the Rav Simcha Midvinsk on that. And I'm going to go through it. And I think it's very interesting. I believe we talked about it in Yoma also, because this is the way I really understand the story, which is there's a pasuk in Zecharia. The Gra says this, and the Rav Simcha Midvinsk assumes that he must have gotten it from this pasuk, which seems to indicate, and the Gra says that when there was no longer a desire for Avodah Zarah, in other words, we saw very clearly in the story what went hand in hand with, if you take away the desire for Giloy Arayot, then you're not going to have any children being born. And you need, right, like every force can be used for positive and also for negative. So he says that what was the counter? So Simcha Midvin says that at the same time that they got rid of the Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah was the same time that there's no longer prophecy. And those things go hand in hand. So Rabbi Blau tries to connect, like, what's the idea? And he says that both of them are a strong sense of wanting to be in the divine presence, right? In other words, again, divine presence of the gods or divine presence of God, actually, right? One is a prophet who's actually, speaking with God. And one is people who are desiring to be with idols as a way of connecting to what they think is God. And that when that desire disappeared, right? So you no longer had this strong force looking for God, and therefore you also no longer have prophecy. And those kind of go hand in hand. And it's also something you see nowadays that there's much less seeking of God in the world, right? It's not as present, this idea. Um, and he quotes Rav Yaakov Emden, who says, what's the idea with the hair falling off? That there is a little bit of this, right? A teeny hair's worth of it in the world, and the people should be seeking that hair, right? Seeking that desire to get closer to God and to find God in the world. And that's an interesting idea to take from this. The strongest idea I take from it is really, which we see in everything in life, even like taking a smartphone, right? Smartphone's a great thing, but it's also a terrible thing, right? And how many people have kids here, you can't take it away from them, or people who are addicted to their telephones, adults, grown adults who just can't get off of it. On the other hand, there's amazing things you can do with smartphones, right? That I can walk around and learn off my smartphone anytime I want, right? You can use it for positive things, you can use it for negative things. So this is what this story is really grappling with, about you sometimes need those forces, but what you really need to do is learn how to control and use them for positive and not use them for negative. Anyway, there's a lot more you can think about this story. We're going to move on though, and to another story. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. What we're really moving into now is specifically this Baal Peor and and Markulis, and how they worship them in a very negative way, right? By defecating in front of Baal Peor, that's disgusting, and Markulis by throwing stones at it. So Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rav, here's a story. There was an Achrit Echad, a Gentile woman. Shaita chola biyoter. She was very sick. Amra, she said, listen, im ta'amod hi isha michol, if I get better from my sickness, telech v'tavod lechol avodot zarot shebaolam. I will do every single method of idol worship in the world. Right? It sounds like a Jew who says, I'm going to worship God. I'm going to promise this, but here it's to idols. Amda v'avda kol avodot zarot shebaolam. So she goes and she worships every single type. Kevan shegiah lePeor, she gets to Peor. Shalala kmarim b'me'ovdim lezo. So every time she gets to a new temple, she says, "How do you worship this?" So she finds out about Peor. Amrula ochlim tradim v'shoktim shechar. So you eat these tradim those are beets, like chard. V'shotim shechar, and you drink beer. Umatchizim b'fanei, and then after you eat, whatever comes out, you defecate right in front of the Peor. Abra, she says, disgusting. Mutav, I'd rather be sick. I'd much rather not worship idols like this. Atem Beit Yisrael Nam came, but now comes Rav Yehuda Amarav, and he says, but you Jews are not like that, because, as someone mentioned earlier in the chat, Hanitzmadin Labal Peor. What did the Jews do? Remember, after the whole Bilam story, they go and they worship idols. And what idol? Baal Peor, this disgusting idol. Now, what's nitzmadim? So now they're going to explain nitzmadim, kitsamid patil. Kitsamid patil is a very tight seal on something. It's like really, really tight. They were tight with Baal Peor. And if you compare that to even in their good times, when they were tight with God, how were they tight with God? They don't use the word nitzmadim. Atem hadvekim b'Hashem lekechem. You cling to God. What does that mean, cling? Like two dates stuck to each other, which can really come apart pretty easily. Whereas nitzmad is totally sealed shut. So their approach to Avodah Zarah was even stronger than their desire to be with God. But b'matnitatan, in a different brighter, I actually darshan these two words, nitzmad and nidbak, in an opposite manner. Hanitzvadin l'Baal Peor kitsamid al yidei isha. It's like a tzamid. It's tzamid, not milashon tzamid patil, but tzamid milashon, a bracelet. Now, a bracelet on a woman, they say, right? It moves all the time. It's not really clinging to her wrist. It moves around. But when it comes to God, you really cling to God properly, that you won't, right? Like you think of sticky honey and it's stuck and nothing's going to happen. Right? It's not going to get come off. So we have two opposite approaches for how to darshan these words. Tanu Rabbanan, another story. Maaseh Besafta ben Alas. Okay, it's a person's name. It was a Jewish person, even though it doesn't sound like such a Jewish name. He lent out his donkey, which means basically he's riding this woman on a donkey, like an old-fashioned taxi ride. Okay, so right, like their taxis in those days. So he brings the woman around. Okay, it's like we would say a bathroom stop on the way. They get to Peor. She says, "Oh, good, I need to go to the bathroom. Let me go in." She goes in. She goes to the bathroom. Comes out. He says, "Okay, I want you to wait with the donkey. I'm going to go in now and do that." So she says to him, Amar lo v'lo Yehudi ata, aren't you Jewish? Amar lo ma echpat lach. He says, well, leave me alone. I'll do what I want to do. But we're going to see he doesn't really want to, he wants to defecate in front of Peor, but not because he wants to worship Peor. He wants to disgrace it. Okay? And that's why he doesn't want to tell her. Nichnas pa'ar b'fanav v'kinech b'chotmo. So he does his thing in front of Peor, and he wipes himself on the nose of Peor. Okay, he wipes himself from defecating using the nose of Peor. V'hayu kmarim mekalsim bo v'omrim me'olam lo haya adam shavado lezeh b'kach. The priest there said, wow, we've never seen anyone worship our idol in such a beautiful manner. Like, you did it more than anybody else, okay? Now, he was trying to disgrace it, but he ended up actually doing something positive because for Peor, the worship is to disgrace it. The more you disgrace it, the better, okay? Even though it's counterintuitive. And in fact, the Gemara says, if you take the Mishnah, right? If you defecate in front of it, that's the way you worship it. Even if you try to disgrace it, you're actually, now you wouldn't be chayav the death penalty probably. It would be shogeg because you didn't really realize, but that's a problem. And similarly, we're going to see as even if you're trying to stone it, like in a negative way. Rabbanit Michelle, and here we're going to have a story with Rabbanit Michelle. He got to this place, Beit Torta, there was Markulis there. So they said to him, this is an idol. So what did he say? Now, they didn't tell him what kind of idol it was. So what did he do? To show disrespect, Shako Pisa Shadabe picks up a clod of earth and throws it at it in disrespect. Amrulo, they said to him, oh, Markulisi. Oh, this is Markulis. So what you just did was actually worshiping it. Doesn't obviously have to be stones, it seems like. As long as you throw anything at it, that's the way you worship it. Amar Luhu, but he said to them, but I'm not obligated because look at the wording in the Mishnah. Hazolek even lim Markulis tnan. If you throw a stone to Markulis, now I threw a stone at Markulis, right? It's like laughing with someone or laughing at someone, right? I didn't fulfill what the Mishnah said that you're going to be high of the death penalty because I did bim Markulis, to Markulis. It says, right, for Markulis. I didn't do it for it. I did it kind of at it. Atashal Beit Midrash. He goes into the Beit Midrash to just question, make sure he's right. Amruleh has a rake Evan bir Markulis. And they say, what do you mean? You got it wrong. The version of the Mishnah is not like you said, and not like it says in our text. But they said the version of the Mishnah is has a rake Evan bir Markulis. At Markulis, you're going to be chayav. Even if you want to stone it in a negative way, you're still obligated, just like we saw with Peor. Amar lehu ezel eshkales. He said, fine, I got to fix this. Let me go take it back. I'll go collect my clod of dirt and take it back. They said, no. Whether you put it there or whether you take it back, you're going to be obligated. Why? Everyone you take away leaves more room for someone else to throw another one. So you're basically helping. I was thinking of those wishing wells, and people throw coins in them, and sometimes they get so full that there's no room for coins to actually clean them out. So that's what they're saying. You're basically allowing people to have the space to throw more stones at it. By cleaning it, you're actually helping people worship idols. So no, you have to leave it. So he really had no way to fix what he had done. Okay, new Mishnah. From here, we're moving on to a new topic, which is when question whether it's a new topic or the same topic. This is Molech. Molech was a okay, we'll see, but let's call it a god right now. Okay, our general perception is it's a god that people would offer their child to the Molech. Okay, now it's called La'avil Bino LaMolech, which we generally assume means, right, you would sacrifice your son. How you would do it, we're going to learn all about this today. And you might be surprised by what you hear because probably what you think is not necessarily what it says here unless you've learned this well and then you know. Okay. Anyway, with that said, we're going to talk about it. And the question is going to be, is it a type of idol worship or is it not? Okay, I'll read you some verses to start just so you get kind of into the whole thing, which is in Vayikra chapter 20, it says, El B'nai Israel, beginning of the chapter, to Ish Ish Mi B'nai Israel, Menager, okay, with the Jewish people, Asher Yitain Mizaro LaMolech. Now, notice what it says, who gives their children, their child, from their children, to the Molech. Motuma will get killed. Amaretz Yirmu Be'even. That's why it's here, because we're talking about the Niskalim. They will get stoned. Ani atena panai be'ishahu, and I will turn my face to this person. Bichrati otomi kerev hamo, and I will wipe him out from within the land. Ki mizaro natan lamoch. So there's karet here. Okay, that's Isur Karet also. So you get the death penalty, stoning. I see you're asking why this is here, not in Avodah Zarah. It's here because we have to figure out who gets stoned. In order to figure out who gets stoned, we need to understand all the details of all the people who get stoned. So now they say, okay, blah, blah, blah. And then if the people ignore this and they don't punish this person, okay, then Santiani Panai Beisha, who I will wipe them out. Okay, that's the first pasuk. There's another pasuk. Okay, now notice there that we're going to learn that Molech is putting your child through the fire. Now it doesn't say fire in the pasuk there. It just says lahavir et beno lamolech, to pass your child to the molech, which we don't really know what it was. And there's two verbs there that we're going to darshan. There's latet, to give, and there's lahavir, to pass it. So we're going to understand what that is. And then I'm just going to quote you another pasuk because it's important for the background. In Devarim chapter 18, pasuk Yud, it says, Lo yimatzeh becha, I don't want to be found among you, ma'avir bino ubito ba'esh, one who passes their child through fire. Now notice it doesn't say Molech there, and it doesn't say fire by us. Later, the Gemara is going to darshan, oh, there's ma'avir bino bito, there's ma'avir bino bito. This pasuk in Devarim must be the Molech, and that pasuk by us must mean through fire. Okay, that's one of the typical ways of darshaning the Torah. And then the rest of that pasuk is koseng samim onenu menachesh umechashev. It doesn't talk about idols there. It's talking about people who are engaged in witchcraft and all sorts of things like that. So there's two approaches to understanding this Molech. Is it idol worship by giving your child, or is it a sort of magic that people were doing? They would put their child to the Molech, and then with that, right, something would happen, like they would expect some sort of magic, fortune telling, something. We don't know exactly what. So that's a big debate here, and we're going to see it inside. I just sort of wanted you to understand it outside because I wanted you to see before we read it inside what the facts are that we have and then how they create from those facts the details. Another thing that's very interesting is we're going to learn, there are going to be two interpretations of what exactly it means to pass it through fire. And the commentaries disagree about because it never says the child has to die. Like we generally think, at least I always thought, Molech is your child dies. You sacrifice your child to the Molech. In fact, if I would have asked you without looking inside, you probably would have thought you kill your child, like slaughter it. But no, it's putting your child through fire. It's not clear whether the child has to die or not for you to fulfill the Averah, the sin of doing it. Okay, because you're going to see it's not putting in like a fiery furnace. It's not. It's not what you think. It's some other kind of putting through fire. And it's not clear the child dies from that. So anyway, we're going to talk about all these things and more. You have to do those two actions. This is what I said already. You're only going to be obligated if you, remember I told you, latet et zaro and lahavil. You have to give it to the priests, and then the child has to be passed through this fire. There's a debate about whether the father does through the fire, because once it passes it on to the priests of the Molech, seemingly it sounds like the priests take the child and pass it through the fire. Some people think it goes back to the father, and the father, you give him over, then you take the child back just to do the rite of passing it through the fire. So there's a debate between Rashi and the Ramban. Rashi thinks the Komarim do it, the priests. The Ramban says no, it would have to be the father would have to do it to be obligated. It wouldn't be enough just to give to the Komarim. Okay, but it's certainly not enough if the child never passes through the fire and all you did was offer it to the you offer your child to the priests of the Molech and nobody does anything after that. That's what we're going to see now in the Mishnah. Masar lemolech below Havir be'esh. You gave it to the priest, but they didn't put him through the fire, or nobody did. Or Havir be'esh below Masar lemolech. You put it through the fire, but you didn't give it to the Molech. Okay, so a father who passes his child through fire for the Molech, but never gave over the child to the priests, that's not obligated either. As again, it doesn't mean you should do this, but you're not going to be obligated the death penalty. Eino chayav. No, they didn't really need to say this, but ad shim sur lemolech. So if it wasn't clear, you have to do both actions. So now the Gemara says, okay, let's look at the Mishnayot. Katane avodah zara, v'katane molech, right? We finished with avodah zara, now we move to molech, which means that they're not the same thing. Amar Rabbi Avin, Tanan Kemanda Amar, Molech lav avodah zara. Okay, the Mishnah must be like the one who says molech is not avodah zara, because it separates them. And here we're going to see there's a machloket about it. Titania says in a braita, Chala molech, Chala shar avodah zara chayav. If you pass your child through fire for the Molech, or you do it for any other god, you're obligated, because what's the nafkamina if you say this is a type of avodah zarah? Well, then this becomes also a major way of worship. And if you do it for some other idol, then you'll be obligated as well. But Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, this is a unique thing for the Molech. Putting your child through fire in some other way is not avodah zarah. And if it's not avodah zarah, then it won't be obligated if you do it for some other god. Because it has nothing to do with idol worship, like we said before. It has to do with witchcraft. Okay, it doesn't say that inside, but the commentaries say that. And that's obvious from that pasuk I showed you. That's why I showed it to you before. Rabbi Elazar, okay, so comes Abai and says, Amar Abai, when he hears this debate, he says, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Chanina ben Antuginus Amrut Avarachad. Abai likes to compare different things and say, oh, this person said that, this person said that. They're really saying one and the same. So we have Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, who says, this is not avodah zarah. So Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Hadamachan, and now we're going to see where Rabbi Chanina ben Antuginus says the same thing. Did time. It's obviously not going to be exactly the same thing, but Abai is going to say they're the same, and the Rav is actually going to say they're not the same. Rabbi Chanina ben Antuginus Omer, Mipnei ma tafsa Torah lashon Molech. Why did it call it Molech? What's Molech sound like? A king. Kol shehimlichuhu alehem afilu tzur afilu kesam. If you take a little toothpick or you take a little pebble and you call it and you say, this is going to be my king, and then you pass your child through fire for it, you're going to be obligated. That's Rabbi Chanina ben Antuginus, which sounds like it's about making someone king, not an idol. A king is not an idol. Now, you could turn a king into an idol. But this is saying, you just said this is going to be a king for me. That's not an idol. So it sounds like he's saying same thing. It's not avodah zarah. But Rava says there's actually a difference between them. We're not saying exactly the same thing because Molech arai ikabenayu. The difference between them is, what if you just take a temporary Molech? Like if you take a toothpick and say, this is Molech, obviously it's not a permanent Molech. So the first opinion would say, no, it would have to be a permanent Molech. This would say, right, the second opinion would say, as long as it's just something even temporary, you call it Molech, you're going to be obligated. So it's not necessarily that they say exactly the same thing, according to Rav. Turning now to Amabet. Now we're going to have all sorts of other details about this. So Amar Rabbi Yana, and this we talked about in the Mishnah already, but I elaborated based on the Gemara. Eino chayav ad shimserenu lakmarim. What does it mean to give it over? You have to give it to the kmarim, okay, to the priests. Shenemal umizaracha lo titein lavir lamolech. It says lo titein. You have to give the child over before you do laha'avir. Right? There's those two actions. Tanya namihach. Here's a braita to support. Yachol hevir v'lo masar yechayat. You might have thought if you pass it through, but you don't actually give it over, right, to if you pass it through the fire, but you don't give it over, you might have thought you'd be chayav. This is just saying the exact same thing. Talmud lomar lo yitain, lo titain. It says don't give, that means you have to give the child over first. Masar lamolech v'lo ha'evil. What if you gave it to the Molech, but you didn't pass it through fire? Yachol yechayav. This is just saying the exact same thing in the Mishnah, but proving it from the psukim, which is what the Midrash Halacha do, and it's why the Gemara likes to quote them, because they fill in what the Mishnah didn't tell you, which is where do we learn it in the verses. Talmud lomar laha'avil. It says laha'avil. So you need both. Masar v'hevir shelo lamolech. This is what we talked about before. What if you, okay, this is the opinion that it's not avodah zarah, because what if you gave your child to something else? Maybe you be chayav, Talmud lomar lamolech. Okay, it says specifically lavir lamolech, and therefore only if you give it to the molech are you going to be obligated. Masar ve'avir lamolech v'lo be'esh yachol yechayav. Now, remember, those psukim didn't say anything about fire, but now they say, how do we know it has to be fire? And this I already told you outside. Ne'amar kan lahavil v'ne'amar la'lan lo yimtza b'cha ma'avil b'no b'to be'esh, because the same word is used in the molech psukim about lavir lamolech, but it didn't say fire. And when it comes to Devarim, when it talked about all the witchcraft and all that, and then it said also, don't pass your child through fire, but it didn't say Molech, but we learn, this is what I told you, we're going to learn from one to the other. Ma'alahalam be'esh, afkan be'esh, just like the pasuk in Devarim says fire, also the ones in Vayikra about the Molech are fire, and ma'kam Molech, afkan Molech, and just like the one in Vayikra was clearly the Molech, also the one in Devarim we're talking about specifically the Molech. Okay, and this all goes with the approach that Molech is not a type of avodah zarah. So if you do this for a different idol, you're not going to be obligated because that's not a typical way of worshiping any idol. Amarav acha b'rei derav hevir kol zaro patur. Another exemption. What if you gave all your children over? Shneimar mi zaracha v'lo kol zaracha. It says if you give from your children to the Molech and not all your children. It also raises a problem. You give all your children, you give one after the other. As soon as you did the first one, you're obviously obligated. So how can you say if I gave all my children, right, I'm retroactively not going to be obligated? That seems weird. If already the obligation kicks in when I did number one. So possible answer, it's talking about when you did all of your children all at once. Okay, the Quran gives some nice footnote, some nice explanation about it, has a nice footnote about it where they talk about what's the idea behind this, which is they must be quoting a commentary, I don't remember right now, but the idea that if the whole idea is you're being thankful to the Molech for what you have. So you're offering one child to be thankful for everything else you have, which again, it's a very hard concept for us to grasp. But the idea is if you have no children left, like you have nothing to be thankful for, right? Assuming children is what makes you thankful in life. So it would be weird, right? Or even if it's not the only thing that makes you thankful, but if you have no more children, you had children, you have no more children, you won't be very happy. So it's an idea of Thanksgiving. And for that, you're kind of offering one out of many. And that's why there's some logic to that whole, that halacha. By Rav Ashi, Heviro suma mahu. What if your child is blind when you're putting him through the fire? Or yashen mahu, or sleeping, right? Does the child have to have awareness of what's going on or not? So we're not going to have an answer to those questions. But ben bino uben bito mahu. What if it's your grandchildren? Are you obligated? Because we said son. On the other hand, it also said zera, which is offspring. So tifshat miachad. At least one of these questions we can have an answer to, which is the last one. Ditanya. It says in a Braita, Ki mizaro natan lamolech. They're going to darshan that pasuk. This is a classic structure of a midrash halacha. And pay attention to what I'm saying because we're going to come back to this. The way a classic midrash halacha works is it quotes you a pasuk, then it says this teaches you something, but then they're like, well, could be this, it could be that, and then they say, that's why the pasuk came. This is going to have something wrong with it, where the Gemara is going to ask because it's not going to fit that structure perfectly. So the pasuk we're quoting that you assume they're going to, in the end, darshan it from is Ki mizaro natan lamolech. Pay attention because in the end, when they say Talmud lomal, and that's why it says, it actually quotes a different pasuk. Okay, so, and thank you, Miriam, for saying it's the Maharal who says the idea of the Thanksgiving. Okay, thank you. So, ma Talmud lomar, mizaro natan lamolech, ma Talmud lomar. The fish ne'emar lo yimsa b'chama avir b'no b'to ba'esh, and li'ela b'no b'to. Ben b'no ben b'to minayin. So this is an obvious question. It says child, son, and daughter. Maybe it only means son and daughter. Talmud lomar. Now, what would you expect them to say? The original pasuk we started with. Ki mizaro natan lamolech. But that's not the pasuk they quote. They quote instead, biti to mizaro. When you give of your zera, which is another pasuk about the Molech. Okay, it's the pasuk Vayikra Bet, pasuk Kaf, pasuk Dalid. Okay, it's in that section, but it's the next pasuk, not the one we started with. So the Gemara questions this. It says, Tana patach mi bikizaro, v'selech bitito mizaro. They started with one pasuk as if that's the pasuk they were learning everything from, but then they darshaned it from a different pasuk. So they say, drasha acharinahu. There's actually two drashot going on here. One is from one pasuk, one is from the other. So again, zaro means any offspring, even your grandchildren. And there's another thing you learn here, which is zero zera kasher, zera pasuminayin, tabalomar bitito mizaro. You might have thought zera means kosher lineage, like children that are good children, not like, let's say they were born from a bad lineage, like a mamzer or something like that. So if they're mamzerim, you might think maybe, we don't care if you give your child to the Molech or you're not fulfilling you're not doing the prohibition properly. But they say, no. Zaro includes any kind. Doesn't matter if it's disqualified children or not and what their status is. Amar Rav Yehuda, right? This is just going through all the technical details. When does it apply? When does it not apply? Amar Rav Yehuda, Eino chayav ad she'avirenu derech havara. Now we're finally to get to what this is. You have to do it like passing through. Okay, what does that mean, passing through fire? Hechidami, right? This is why also it's not just throwing into a fiery furnace, because there's some sort of idea of passing through fire. So again, machloket Abai Rava, what this is. Amar Abai shraga delivne b'mitzeh, nur mehaigisa v'nur mehaigisa. You have a row of bricks, kind of high up. You walk there holding the child. You have to be ma'avir. That's why it's hard to understand if the child dies, how do you not die? It's a little bit of a strange thing. You hold the child on this, you walk them through this row of bricks and there's fire on both sides. That's why I said it's not clear here, and the commentaries disagree here. Does the child have to die, or is it just that they're passed through fire even if they don't die? Okay, so that's one option. Rava Amar ki mishavarta depuria. It's like what kids do on Purim. Okay, I don't know what happens by you, but there's definitely kids in my neighborhood that play with firecrackers and all sorts of things around Purim time. Much more common in Israel than outside of Israel. But here they did much more dangerous things. The kids would jump over, like they would make a fire in a pit and they would jump over the pit back and forth. Okay, kids do all sorts of things that they want to live on the edge. Sometimes kids really get hurt from these things, right? So anyway, what they say is that's what the father does. The father kind of jumps the child over this fiery pit. Okay, which again, it's not clear if the child dies from it or not, especially since it's something people do, right? But maybe like a small child can't handle this. Unclear exactly. Tanya Kavateda Rabbi, here's a bright sport. Rabbi's reading, Eno chayavat shavirenu derech havara. Heviroba regel patur. If you did it by foot, it's forbidden. Ve'eno chayav ela al okay, and then the bright is going to continue with all sorts of other things. Eno chayav ela al yotzei yirecho. You're only obligated if you do this to people who came out of you, meaning okay, even if you're a man, okay, you weren't pregnant, but you created a child. So haketzad, who would be included? Beno bito chayav, your son and daughter, you'd be obligated. Aviv imo, if you do this to your father or mother, achiv achoto, your brother, your sister, obviously, patur. That's not yotzei yirecho. Hevir atzmo, patur. What if you do it for yourself to the Molech? You offer yourself to the Molech, you're exempt. But Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon mechayev. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon's mechayev. In a minute, we're going to see what this machloket is about. The Braita just continues with another machloket we already saw, which is echad lemolech, echad l'shar avodah zarah chayav. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon omer lemolech chayav shelo molech patur. That was the machloket we started with. Is this a form of avodah zarah, and therefore would you be obligated if you did this to other gods or not? And that's the same machloket we saw earlier. So now we're going to figure out why they have this machloket about yourself. So they say, Amar kra lo yimatzei becha. Right? It says, you can't find among you. That was the pasuk I read in the beginning from Vayikra Kaf. Sorry, this is the one in Dvarim. Lo yimatzei becha ma'avir beno bito bat lemolech. Becha ba'atzmecha. Becha adds also you yourself can't do it. Can't even pass yourself. But the rabbis obviously disagree. So the Gemara questions that. What do you mean the rabbis disagree? Rabbanan lo darsha becha. V'hatnan. They actually darshan becha, okay, based on some other, in a different place, in a totally different context. To mean yourself. Aveda v'avedat aviv shelo kodemet. You find two lost items and you can't take them both. Okay, let's say they're animals and you don't have enough wherewithal to take two animals with you. So whose do you return? Your own. Okay, being that even though it's your father, you would think you have to respect your father, you actually take care of your own first. Where do we learn that from? V'amrina my time. Where do you get it from? V'amar Rav Yehuda amar kra efes kilo yebechav yon. This is a pasuk that basically says, right, God is kind of promising there won't be poor people. And what it really means is you have to make sure that there aren't poor people. Now, how do you make sure there aren't poor people? Well, right, give charity and all that. But they say here, lo yeh bechav yon. What is becha? That's the word we were darshaning before. Shelo kodem l'shel kol adam. You have to make sure you don't become an evyon. So if you find a lost item of yours, return it before you return your father's, because you have to take care of yourself first. So the rabbis darshan becha to be yourself. Why don't they darshan it in the Molech pasuk as well? So they say, hatame efes. That word has this extra word, efes. Efes means nothing, but what it really is saying is, really make sure, shelo yeh becha yon, and that allows us to darshan becha to mean to yourself, take care of yourself first. But in the absence of the word efes, or some sort of word that's stressing it, the becha in the Molech case is just, don't have among you, meaning all of you, don't have someone who can pass their child to the Molech, and it doesn't teach that you pass yourself. So that's what the machloket between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Shimon, and the rabbis. Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. We're going to end with this last thing. Shalosh kritot b'avodah zarah lama. 3 psukim that relate to avodah zarah. Now it's a little confusing because 2 are in Molech, and there was a whole debate: is Molech avodah zarah or not? But they're going to say basically, if we take all the psukim, and even the third isn't exactly avodah zarah, it sort of is, sort of isn't. The third is in Bamidbar. Okay, you can read in Rashi, he quotes all the psukim. The first 2 are in those first few psukim in Vayikra, where it says karet twice. We saw that before, and it also says karet, where it talks about if someone accidentally worships idols, and then it says if you it uses the words migadef et Hashem. Okay, it's Bamidbar chapter 15, verse 30 and 31. Hanefesh asher taseh biyad ramah. So after it says basically what you have to bring if you accidentally worship idols, then it says v'hanefesh asher taseh biyad ramah. If you do this on purpose, min hasrach min ager et Hashem umigadef. You basically curse God. This big machla, and there it says karet. And the next pasuk also says he kareti karet, which is a double language. Okay, we're going to get to all that in a minute. That pasuk talks about megadef Hashem, you're cursing God, but it also is in the context of avodah zarah. It sounds like if you worship idols, that's a curse to God. So there's a machloket: is the karet here on one who curses God, or is the karet on an idol worshiper? It's unclear. So that's what we're going to relate to now. So first they say, Shalosh Kritop Avodah Zarah. So right now they're going to assume it's talking about Avodah Zarah, that pasuk. So we have 2 in the Molech, 1 there. What are they all there for? Echad l'kedarka, echad shelo kedarka, ve'echad l'molech. They were teaching you 3 different ways of worshiping idols. One if you worship in its normal way, one if you worship in its atypical way. Let's say you slaughter all those main actions. If you do it in its not typical way of worshiping that idol, you're going to be obligated anyway. We've seen this a whole bunch of times. And one for the Molech. So now, if you say, if it's already included in Avodah Zarah, then what's it adding? Why do you need a third? They want you to know that this is added to that list of the ones that you do it shelo kedarka. You do it for a different, right? If Molech is a type of way of worshiping idols, then if you were pass your son through even to a different idol, like to Pa'or or something else, you're going to be obligated anyway. That's a chiddush. Okay, that it's not because before we just had Zoveach, Kater, right? All those ones and the Shtachavah. Now this is another one, also Molech. Lemavir beno karepa molech lama. Sorry, I said that. Ulamand amar megadefa v'dazarai karepa begadef lama li. Now, if you view that pasuk about the one who cursed God as Avodah Zarah, which I said before, some people think that, then why do you need karet here? Because we already have Avodah Zarah from the other two. So what do you need a third pasuk here for? They say lechidetanya, we need it for the following. Braita, we'll end with this braita. He karet. Why the double language in that pasuk that we saw by the megadef? Ba'olam hazeh. Right? He karet ba'olam hazeh, he karet lo'olam haba. This is a karet that's so bad that you lose your portion in the world to come as well. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Amar lo Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says, wait, you're darshing the double language of he karet, but what about the pasuk before? Tikare, right? Also, remember I said it said karet in the pasuk before. So Amar lo Rabbi Yishmael, look far namar v'nechrita. B'chish shlosha olamim yesh. What you want to say? Olam hazeh, olam haba, in some third world? There is no other third world. Okay. So Ella, he says, Mechrita is specifically ba'olam hazeh. He karet is lo olam haba, right? Pasuk lamed is one. Pasuk lamed aleph is the other. What do you do with the double language? He karet. Classic Rabbi Yishmael. Dibra Torah l'sham b'nei adam. That's just regular way people speak. Two verbs together doesn't mean that it's a double thing ready to darshan. This is, we know, Rabbi Akiva against Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva is always darshaning every little thing. And Rabbi Yishmael says you have a problem here because you're ignoring the karet in the pasuk before, and therefore I'll agree with you about your drasha, but I think it comes from the two different pasukim and not from hikaret to karet. But that's what it's needed for there, in addition to say, you do this one, you're going to lose also your portion in the world to come. Okay, so what did we do today? We started with all the difficulties against Rav, who said there's no Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah. In the end, we said, well, once you start for the wrong reasons, you end up stuck in there and really desiring it. And then we really explained in the end, though, why we really don't have a desire for it anymore. And that's that whole story that we saw, that's past the story. And from there, we got to some stories about worshiping Baal Peor and disgracing it and all that, and how disgracing it is even a problem. And also from our coolies. And then we got to the Molech, and we got to all the halachic details about Molech. When does it apply? And even though we didn't resolve all of them, as I said, some of them are debates among the commentaries, like does the child have to die for you to be obligated or not? But we did talk about a lot of the different details. And with that, we're going to finish for today. And we finish till the next Mishnah. Tomorrow we start a new Mishnah about the Baal Ov and the Yidoni. So wishing everyone a good day, and we should hear good news in the days to come.